Well, I think it's really important to be grounded in a tradition before you go off into UPG. I think that's the main thing, because like in the way Freedom, my astrology teacher, talks about it, when you're learning something, there's like three parts. One is the tradition and the like traditional sources, the texts and so on, the Shastra. The second is the teachings of your teacher, of what your teacher says. And then the third is your personal experience. So they're all valid and they're all important, but not privileging one over the other is also important. And if you have a personal experience that directly goes against your teacher's teachings and the Shastras, then that there's probably something that needs to be looked at more in depth.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead. Today's episode features two amazing individuals, A.C. Stauble and Isaac Hill, who are both fellow magicians, permaculturalists, and podcast hosts. I've been a longtime fan of their show, the Plant Cunning Podcast, and I'm very happy to welcome them here today. Isaac is a permaculturalist with over a decade of experience gardening and cultivating a native plant nursery. He is the primary gardener of their herb farm, where he has planted hundreds of fruit and nut trees, shrubs, berry bushes, perennial plants, and more. He's also an astrologer, esotericist, and a musician. AC is the co-host of the Plant Cunning Podcast and is a farmer, herbalist, community builder, teacher, and also has her own small herbal product line called the Traveling Herb Farmer. The two of them put together the first Plant Cunning Conference at their herb farm in central New York this past summer, and I was so happy to be a presenter and a teacher at that. In today's interview, we discuss their magical backgrounds, their developing relationship with the land and its spirits, as well as the nature and importance of community and connections within all of our ways of knowing, whether we're talking about herbalism, divination, heathenry, or magic. They're both wonderful individuals whose work I respect and admire, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Before we get started, a quick note to say that if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with some friends, and leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. You can also find more information about the show on our website at coffeeanddivination.com or find us on Instagram. Enjoy! So I'm really excited to have our guests on today and to welcome them. I've been looking forward to this conversation since I got to meet them in person a little bit earlier this year. My guests are Isaac Hill and A.C. Stauble, and it could not be more of a pleasure to have you on to talk today. So welcome.
Thank you. The pleasure is all ours. Yeah, we're very excited to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. We're honored.
So it is a lovely thing to speak with you both. I'm sure many of my listeners already are familiar with your podcast and many of the wonderful guests that you've brought on for many, many episodes. I am a fan of your show, of course, as well. Can you tell, for those who may not be as familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about your journey, since this podcast is primarily about divination, though we dip a lot into other topics, obviously. If there are stories that you might have from how you first developed an interest in things that are occult, or particularly if there's any entry point into divination that you might have had when you were younger.
Yeah, well, I think I was an occultist in a past life. When I was like a kid, I was drawing pentagrams with various other things inside them. But I don't know. But so I was actually first introduced into the spiritual path through more of like a spiritual, like the quest for enlightenment kind of thing when I was 20. And magic was kind of part of it, but didn't really get started until a little bit later. But divination, like the tarot especially, was really big, I guess, for a long time. Even in my early 20s, I was very much into them, into the tarot. I also, like, I was in a band, the Hills and the Rivers, and we like released songs based on tarot. Like we had like the Fool and the Magician and the World, and all these different that I wrote. So it was like themed on the tarot. So that was kind of fun. But I've also done a lot of different divination, specifically runes, geomancy, horary astrology. I'm fascinated by divination in general, but I also I've kind of gone in a lot of directions, tried to like go deeply into the directions that I've gone in though. And so I have a background in ceremonial magic where I've kind of done the Heathen Golden Dawn situation based on John Michael Greer's Celtic Golden Dawn, and with his blessing, used some rituals that he and Sven had developed to to use the Norse and actually also an Anglo-Saxon track to deities and divine names and lore with the Golden Dawn tradition. So that's been one of my main magical paths, as well as, I mean, now I'm studying Vedic astrology, which is, I think, its own magical path. Divination is a big part of it. I mean, astrology could be considered divination. So I'm also an astrologer. So yeah. So that's like my background with all of that. There's a lot more to go, we could go into, but that's kind of like the general outline for me.
So for me, I was raised with parents who raised me in the Roman Catholic tradition. And so my spirituality kind of came from the influence of saints and sort of these old like Bible stories of mysteries and things like that. So I remember from a young age when I was in third grade, I wanted to be Mother Teresa when I grew up, like specifically like some sort of nun to like work some miracles. I spent a lot of time in nature and spent a lot of time with my imagination and reading books and just being outside. Like we were kids who just spent the entire day as soon as we go home from school outside. So I feel like I connected with plants from an early age, and that sort of led me into the herbal journey. As far as divination, I didn't really get into divination until my early 20s, being introduced to tarot with some of my friends and eventually getting my own tarot deck, and doing just a card of the day. So like it's a practice I still do and I've been doing for years. Just in the morning, I wake up and I journal and I pull a card of the day, and it sort of sets the tone for the day. And it's been a way for me to learn the tarot as well, since I came to it kind of later. So that's the gist.
It's very, very lovely. And there's obviously a lot more to go into with both of you
Yes.
from both of your backgrounds and what you created there. So just to kind of talk a little bit about the inspiration for the podcast that you have, I've mentioned it. It is a very interesting mix of people that you bring on. And I was just curious, what was kind of your journey to creating that? What inspired you to want to start having those conversations? Because obviously, I also think that having really good conversations is important.
Yeah, the podcast was something that Isaac and I talked about for about a year before we dove into our first episode, and it came from us both. There's a few reasons why we started the podcast, but one was that we have really amazing networks of people that we already knew that we wanted to highlight their work and bring to the world. And then there was also this aspect of having a lot of curiosity and always trying to continue learning. And we're both really into just learning new things all the time. And so the opportunity to be able to talk to some of these really inspiring people that have informed our lives was something that was very exciting to us. So there's that aspect of being able to continue learning and bringing these people together, but also the connections that have been made is something that's really important to us as well. Like seeing how some of our listeners have learned about some of the people that we've interviewed and how it's impacted their lives. Things like that is one of the main reasons that we did it, is to build this community of people who are focused on the healing arts and blessing and nurturing and bringing about change in the most positive ways that they can into the world. We really like to highlight the people who are doing amazing work, and it's inspiring to people who hear about it.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Did you want to
Oh,
add anything?
yeah. I mean, it's just fun to be able to get to talk to people that you'd admired their work for many years, or like you get to like talk about a book with the author of the book and like really go into it in depth. So that was part of it. But I mean, also like it's basically our interests,
Yeah.
herbalism, wild crafting, permaculture, magic, spirituality, astrology. So it also fits in a niche of cunning, of the cunning arts. And that niche hadn't really been
Yeah.
developed as much. Rune Soup had been doing some shows in that line, and there are some herbalism podcasts, and there are some magic podcasts, but there aren't as many focused on that intersection. So we thought maybe we can have a spot here and help this network coalesce and so on. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and yeah.
Hmm. And you both obviously, I think it needs to be said that there is an enormous amount, that connection and that communication that you've already highlighted is so much a part of all magic,
Yeah.
clearly, but and also particularly divination, since I mean, from my own personal opinion, I think of divination as a relationship in some sense. It's about relationships between people or between spirits. In some way, it is about relating. So everything that you're talking about also relates equally to many different forms of the cunning arts. In that sense. You also live on a beautiful piece of the United States of America, an absolutely gorgeous farm that I'm happy that I've gotten to visit, even if so briefly. Before I have some questions about your connections to that land and how that has been a part of your journey, but can you tell us a little bit about that place that you live and the wonderful things you do there?
Well, we got here in November of 2019. So it was some nice timing there. And it's about a 7.5 acre small farm, and AC is an herbalist. And so we've been focused on growing herbs to create value-added products that she makes. But I've also been doing permaculture since I was 21. And I had practiced on other pieces of land previously, so I had worked out some of the kinks and was able to do things the way I actually wanted to do them. And but so we have like a lot of plants in the ground, a lot of trees I started from seed or cuttings, so they're all very small still. But some of the gardens are starting to really pop, and there's already uh, so much available here already. There are hawthorn, boneset, wild apples, blackberries, and raspberries. There's so much here already. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we can harvest. And as we get to know the land more and we get to co-create this farm with the land and with the plant species, the beings and the animals, we just have a deeper connection with it, and learn more about the land, and we'll learn more about ourselves and about the plants that we're growing. And yeah, but we got two big barns. There's like a barn from the 1800s, which is gorgeous, hand hewn. That's where we had the conference in. And there's a little creek. There's actually a creek on both sides. We're in a triangle. There's a creek on both sides, and then a creek down there. So we have water on all sides.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah, it seems like this parcel of land was very loved and well tended by homesteaders the entire time that it's been this parcel. I mean, just the setup of it and the water, and there's an ancient apple orchard and hawthorns. There's a giant hawthorn tree. I don't know. Did you see it, Joanna, when you were here? The grandmother
No,
hawthorn.
I did not get to see it.
Okay.
Next
So
time.
there's I think a couple of the woods walks and fungi walk got back there, but
It's like a corner tree. It's not on our property. It's like between
Yeah.
several properties. But
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
like a
Even
1,500
more
years.
appropriate. Yeah.
Mhm. And it's just so beautiful. So that's where we go to. It's one of the spots that we go to, like, honor the land and the spirits of the land, and to cry and to ground down. And it feels like you're getting held by your grandmother when you're there. And I don't know if we've told people this part before, but Isaac and I had been looking for property for a really long time, like for over a year and a half. I don't know if that's a really long time, but I had been looking for many years, but just didn't quite have, the funds together and all of this, and everything to bring us here lined up really perfectly. We had been, like, doing some ancestor work to try to get our ancestors on board to helping us find a property. And one of my ancestors passed, leaving us a small inheritance to be able to actually afford a property. But everything we were looking at in that price range was like raw land, or like a really rundown house that we would have had to live in my mini school bus. And we just, kept searching. And we drew out on paper exactly what we wanted, and we listed exactly what we wanted. And every single thing that we had put on that paper with those intentions in my journal was this place. And when we first came here, I didn't even really have to get out of the car. Like, I just felt like this was the one. And then we saw a beehive in one of the honey locust trees,
It was
black locust trees, like right up front. And it was in this, like, shape of a vagina. Like, it was like there was like a womb of honey bees in this tree. And I was like, yes, we're home. This is it. We made an offer that day. It went through. It was just like very easy. And a few other places we looked at, we made offers and it was very hard.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't work. So
we saw this. I saw this place pop up on Zoom.
yeah.
On Zoom, Zillow, on the way to see another place that turned out to be full of mold and way too expensive.
Yeah.
But it popped up, and we called our realtor, and she was like, "Oh yeah, the agent is still there." So the agent was still here putting up the sign. We were the first people to see it. Because I was seeing these kind of things like pop up and then get snagged.
So I definitely felt like there was some magical influence to bring us here. And I feel like the spirits of this land have welcomed us in so beautifully and so kindly. And they know that we're here in service, of the land. And the gardens have just grown so beautifully. And the herbs that we've planted have been so vibrant. And the plants that are already here are so giving, like the raspberries and the elder and the boneset and elecampane. They're just, we're full. It's just full of life here. And yeah, we're just so blessed every day. We're grateful to be here.
We also get depressed too, though. Sometimes, it's not all gumdrops and rainbows.
Now that it's November, Isaac's depressed.
Yes, we can talk about that. The January difficulties of looking ahead.
Yeah.
Now that's really, really beautiful. I think that our story of coming to our land here in Vermont is very similar. I will only tell one part of it because it's so similar to yours, AC, is that when we first got to the place, which had its own series of, synchronicities that led us here, but there's a giant rock that's really near the driveway. And I got out of the car, went on top of the giant rock, and just sat there because I was like, no, this is it. This is our place. And our realtor, who had already become a friend of ours, looked at my husband and said, is she going to come in the house, or
right?
And Daryl was like, no, I think we're pretty set, but Joanna, yeah, you do need to actually see inside the house just for a second. And I was like, fine, technically I will go in, but I already know.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Our poor confused realtor was like, is she what's happening?
Right.
But yes, exactly. That magical welcoming is a really beautiful thing. One of my questions was going to be, did you do specific, workings or magic or divination around that? And I mean, clearly you've already mentioned ancestral work, and these things are so connected to everything else that you're doing that it is very difficult to pick out, oh, there was one specific, we did a working and that was that. It's not the same vision of one thing. Is there anything else that you'd want to add to that, like how you were thinking through the process?
Yeah, we were doing ancestor works, but I think that was one of the main things.
Mhm.
Piece, yeah.
And there was a point where I was just like, come on, guys, and like, can we please do this? And they're like, yeah. But I forgot to write down, we were visioning to have a south facing slope. We have a northeast facing slope.
That was the only thing that didn't make it on paper.
But I think there might have
it's
been a
fine.
reason why
Yeah.
I didn't remember that, because it's
Yeah.
like such one of the things. But
It can get very specific, so don't forget to write things down.
Mhm. There was also an astrology reading that I had when it was my birthday in January, the year before we got, or 2019, the year we got the place. And the person who gave me the astrology reading said that if I was going to buy a place, it needed to be this year before January of 2020, because there was going to be some sort of big shift. And so she predicted that things were going to go crazy at the market. She didn't know what it was, but of course COVID happened and the markets went crazy. And so I had that sense of urgency in our search that helped me to like really be on it,
Yeah.
So there was a divination piece. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Timing is what is the Greek word kairos, the proper timing for all things.
Mhm.
It's wonderful that you had that as well. So when you first came to living on the land, was there anything that you feel magically or from a divinatory setting that you did to kind of help strengthen those connections? I mean, obviously, AC, you were an herbalist, so I mean, you are very knowledgeable about doing workings with that. Isaac, you're a permaculturalist. I could geek out with you for an hour talking just about permaculture. But is there anything particular that you want to share about like those first connections that you made with the land?
Well, one of the first things, one of the reasons we were able to get it less expensive was that it was filled with stuff. The barns were filled with stuff. The person who was selling it, his partner had died, and he just didn't want to have to deal with. He just wanted to get out of the way. So we had to go through everything, and we had to clean the whole house, and took us months to do that. And we did, and I think doing that actually is a magical act. But also we did the floor washes in every room of the house. We did the censing with frankincense and other herbs. We did all of that in the house. My mother went around the barn and did some things that she does. We talked to the spirits of the land. We started putting out offerings immediately. That was walking the land and listening was always a big thing, and still is, obviously. That's like a continuous thing.
I felt like once we cleaned the pile of old trash out of the woods, that was one of the first dumpsters we got. We filled it with trash from the woods, which I don't think a lot of people would have prioritized that, considering we were in like a hoarder house situation. But we did, and I feel like there was a shift in energy there that it built trust with some of the spirits of the land who were like, oh, like finally, like, all right, get that trash out of there. But yeah, the offerings and yeah, share the story about the apple pie.
I don't know. Well, I guess so. We had a friend over who was sensitive, maybe a little dramatic sometimes. But she and another friend went down into not on our property. It's like a no man's land area full of hawthorns and apples. And she picked an apple, came back, and she started freaking out because she felt like there were fairies there that were malicious, mad at her. So there was this whole thing. We me, her, another friend, and AC were all doing our each of our divination tools, using them to figure out exactly what the situation was, if it was dangerous, and
if
what
we
we should do to remedy it.
Try to engage or leave them alone,
So we baked them an apple pie and brought it down, but they just want to be left alone. But that's like it's not on this, and you can tell as soon as you walk down there, there's like Canada thistle. It's just like not hospitable to humans.
And
It's
I
like
was the
their area.
only one in the group that wasn't doing daily protection rituals at the time, of like
Yeah.
lesser banishing rituals and things like that. And I kind of got like the sparkle vibe of the fairies, and I like wanted to be like a trickster, and like just like I'm gonna mess with them and like let them go ahead and like think like that I like got taken by the fairies, and like I don't know, I just like, you know, kind of got like, so it
Affected.
felt like something like was coming over me that was out of character. So that was an
Yep.
interesting
Yep.
experience with some of the neighbors, the good neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. On our land, we also there's a it's 40 acres, and therefore there's enough room for, those areas that are not really. It's not that they're, I don't want to say unfriendly, but just that it is not an appropriate place for humans. It's like, nope,
Yeah.
this is not your area. So I think there's a danger sometimes when people talk about, and I am going to be very careful how I talk about them right now. Obviously, it's
Yes.
just watching my words carefully. But while there are things that are malicious, definitely out there, there are also times when it's not necessarily malicious, but just this is not your place, and you have to respect that. So that's another form of sensing and listening, and also protection rituals, as you're mentioning, to make sure that you can be in a boundaried, healthy way, and also know when it is just not appropriate to be there.
Right. Yeah, they
Yeah.
have their boundaries too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's important to respect those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what it was mainly about.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting you mentioned cleaning the trash out. I think it is a wonderful thing to mention again. It's funny because I had Dr. Al Cummings on a couple of guests back, and he was just, as one of his first things that he tells people when they are going to sort of come up with, they want to connect with a local graveyard or something like that, is to take a trash bag with them. It's the very
Yes.
first thing. It's like, yes, you want to offer incense, you want to offer all these other things, take the trash bag and clean. And that's the best way to ingratiate yourself and be a good neighbor, which I think goes with the good neighbors as well as, dead and anything else.
Yeah.
Being clean is very good. So that's a really interesting thing, and to bring up about your connection to that land. When you were first considering creating the conference that you did this year, that I am, so happy I was able to be a part of, was that something that you felt, um, I'm sure you did, so it's a leading question, but did you have conversations with the land? Do you feel like it was something that the land wanted, that you wanted, that a friend brought to you first? Like, how did that come to be?
Well, we've been talking about it for a while, I guess, because it just seems like it's an important thing to do, especially post COVID, is have in-person gatherings. And it's something that AC and I both have done a lot in the past. Like when I was in the band, I would help put on shows a lot, and we would have our own DIY music festival in Pittsburgh. And she would also help run conferences and so on. So it's kind of something we had the skill set for, and we like to do. And the space is kind of like the begging for it.
The barn was
Yeah.
definitely begging for it. I mean, you walked in there and you're just like, where are the people? When are we going to have like an educational event or a dance party or wedding or something,
Down.
Go
Yeah.
down. So yeah, there was a combination of that.
But we were just kind of talking about it with, was Lisa Fazio, I believe, or no, somebody, I think it was her, or maybe it was Kate Gilday. And it was more of a local herbalist. We were, asking, would you be interested in doing something like this? And they were like, yeah. Who you might also ask, well, how about Matt Wood? Yeah. Matt, yeah. So, and Matt Wood is, I don't know if people don't know who Matthew Wood is. He's one of the more well-respected herbalists in the United States. He's written some very wonderful books. And he lives like in Minnesota, I believe. So I wouldn't have expected him to come out, but apparently he used to do conferences in this area a lot, and he likes this area, has friends here, Kate Gilday and so on. And so we were like, okay, on a whim, we had interviewed him previously, so we knew him. I sent him an email and he said, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, oh,
This
okay,
is real.
so we have to do this now.
Like, okay,
Yes.
we have our keynote speaker and some other local herbalists who are interested. And Kate and Lisa used to run regional conferences here for many years. And there's just not like a specific herb conference to Central New York region. There's a few day-long herb conferences that happen. There's one in Ithaca, and there's some fungi conferences, and even Mycology Summit has been like a really awesome gathering in New York, and it was actually in Vermont this year. But nothing was doing what we do on our podcast of integrating the spiritual, healing, divination, magical side with the practical herbalism side. It was just all very much, how to heal people with herbs or like case studies, or, it was very much an herbal conference. And the Plant Cunning Conference is different. It's like bringing in these different healing modalities and forms of magic and things together. And I don't know if that's really been done in person in this region, so I think that it was also filling a niche like the podcast was, and people were hungry for it. And I was a little bit concerned, like if we would get enough people to come to make it worth it, to be able to pay the speakers and to pay for the tent and the porta potties and all the things that we need to run a conference. And it was a little like hairy the first few months. We had like 30 people signed up. And then within the last 2 months, we had this like flood, and it came up to be 125 people that came to gather in our barn. And very few complaints, like almost no complaints. People had a fantastic time. And the first year doing anything, it's a little scary. You're like, can we do it? Like, is this possible? Because it's never been done before by us. Like, so there was a lot of stress leading up to it. But as soon as people started arriving, it was just like you hit play on the conference mode and it just sort of takes off, and everything fell into place, and it was beautiful. So that's pretty much how it came to be.
With what you're talking about, that nexus point between herbalism and since it is also on a regenerative farm as well, permaculture, and also the arts of magic and divination, that beautiful Venn diagram, and finding that point in the middle of it, which I think is just amazing and very needed. You both have different specialties. You both are, experts in slightly different fields. How do you feel that? Do you feel that the role of magic or animism or some of these modalities is growing within each of your areas of expertise? Do you feel like it's still kind of off to the side? This is kind of a separate question because, for Isaac, I'm thinking more along the lines of the permaculture world. AC, I'm thinking more about the herbalism world, but obviously you both are in both, so feel free to answer in whichever way you'd like.
I think for the herbalism world, there's a deepening chasm and divide happening, actually, of the animistic herbalism and the material reductionist scientific only herbalism. And that happened during COVID, when it became really volatile on the internet to sort of speak out against the scientific materialist reality, and people were really scared and afraid, and looking to other herbal leaders for guidance on what to do about COVID specifically. And the people who were treating it from a more spiritual perspective kind of got pushed into the conspiracy theorist zone, which is like not a great place to be in. And I feel like it kind of pushed people more into the dark in some ways. And some people responded in the opposite way, and they were more vocal about how herbs can actually heal. And that was part of the reason why I thought this conference was so important too, was to sort of bring some love and some light to the people who are embracing the more spiritual side of healing and having the faith in the plants and the herbs and our own bodies. And so I am seeing like a greater divide, but I think that it's starting to chill a little bit out there and people are starting to come back around. But yeah, it's definitely something that I've noticed.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of fear around those conversations then for a long time, which takes time to.
Mm-hmm.
And places like spaces where you can actually be in person, I feel are important
Yes.
for that, because that
Right.
does make a big difference when you're having a conversation with a nameless, faceless, person. It is a very different conversation than looking someone in the eye and being able to hear their voice in a different way.
It's true.
So,
Very true. Even if you know the person online, they have a name and a picture,
mhm.
you're not there with them, and it's so much easier to dehumanize them or to not see them as a person
Mm-hmm.
with valid concerns. But I think that bifurcation in that chasm is happening in a lot of areas, and I think in permaculture too. And I've been seeing sort of more of the animism and the magical side move in permaculture, as well as the more material reductionist. Um, this is the only way type stuff too. But there's just like with the internet, I think there's just a this branching out, a lot of that branching out, and there, in one manifestation of this is echo chambers, but that's one of the other things that we want to do with the podcast and with the conference is to bring people together and have voices that disagree with each other or that don't. I mean, because there's not a single person of the people that I look up to and I read and I take in information. I don't think there's a single person that I agree with totally.
Yeah.
Not anybody, so it's like, and it seems so like on the internet these days you have to agree with everything or you're bad. And maybe that's maybe that's me being reductive, but I feel that way sometimes for sure. So
Yeah. Yeah. My husband's best friend always says that you should always keep 10% doubt. And that's
yeah,
not to say like, oh, because you just never want to have full faith in something, but just because that's a healthy place to be, which means that, of course, you have to allow for disagreement because otherwise that's not even possible. But that does seem to be, unfortunately, rarer these days to even be able to have 10% disagreement,
yeah,
let
Yeah.
alone, just voicing other opinions and letting that be a safe place to be, which I think is for those, I'm sure many people listening did not get to be at that first conference. And I will simply say, as someone who was present, it was a beautiful space that you were able to create to allow for differences of opinion in a way that didn't make anyone feel like they could not voice their opinion. It felt a very reasonable and safe place to be able to have an opinion and say it without feeling the need for everyone to agree. There was no one platform, which I think is what we're kind of talking about at heart,
yeah,
is being able to have multiple viewpoints all at the same table.
right. But at the same time, we were also kind of promoting the more spiritual perspective.
Oh, sure, definitely.
So it's kind of like it's a balance to because that perspective has been derided and pushed away, especially lately. But so it's kind of a balance of keeping it open and allowing for disagreement, but also promoting what we see as helpful too. So
Mhm.
because that's the thing for me too, is especially like as I've been studying Vedic astrology as well and studying other systems. I mean, it's like in India, Vedic astrology isn't separate from yoga, isn't separate from Ayurveda, isn't separate from puja. They're all connected intimately, and that's the way it was in Europe previously to the 1700s. And I feel like that's the way it will be again in the U.S. Whenever the U.S. might not be called the United States anymore. Like, I don't know, but so that's part of, I think, our purpose too, is to help work towards that integration, and that's one of the visions that we have to help in any small way that we can. Yeah.
And AC, within the herbalism world, you are talking about how there has been that sort of separation because people, wanted to watch carefully kind of like what they were saying around that. There was a lot of fear just culturally about that. You're saying that you've seen that kind of change. Are there other things that you feel people could sit with in order to integrate that spirituality into their herbalism while not negating the scientific perspective? Because I'm sure that you have some good thoughts on that as an herbalist.
I think that there's totally room for both, the spiritual and the scientific
Hmm.
as an herbalist, you know. And um I don't know, were you gonna say you had a thought? I like lost my train of thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the material perspective is very useful and it's very
Yeah.
helpful for especially certain things. With the problem is when it becomes reductive and that's the only truth.
Hmm.
But and it's also I see people go off in la la land and without any touching base with reality all the time too. So it go in the other direction. So it's important to balance those and to my in magic and astrology and so on, I've always tended to look at the more rigorous systems and forms, and sometimes you forget that some people are doing some batshit nuts, like totally like ungrounded stuff too, and I'm not for that either.
Yeah, yeah. Within our tradition of witchcraft, and I think it's important in divination too, magic and divination, is that there is the importance of having, um, I'm going to use the word community. I don't really necessarily even mean traditional community, but the idea of having multiple sources for information, which also means multiple voices that you are talking to about it. Myself and my co-high priestess of the coven frequently talk about our divination or our magic in advance, afterwards, even during, depends on what's happening. But that making sure that you have a sounding board, making sure that you have other places you're getting your information. I think it is also a cultural thing, as you were mentioning the echo chamber. It's the same thing. You can get into a magical or a divinatory echo chamber just as easily as you can get into a news media or anything else echo chamber. And I think that's also part of unfortunately what sometimes happens.
Yeah, yeah. um
And I think deepening the relationship with the plants themselves from an herbal perspective,
Mhm.
like treating the plants as individuals and being open to the messages that you can receive from them is really powerful. And it's how our ancestors have always interacted with the plants rather than just being something that we can use for medicine because of the scientific constituents. A lot of the things that we've learned about the scientific constituents of plants have come from this deep knowledge of our ancestors who have been working with them in these ways for a long time. And so, yeah, I feel like that's one way for herbalists to deepen their knowing and understanding is to just become really tight with some plants and get to know them in the fields and the forests and not just in the apothecary. So that's one
Mhm.
thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. In magical conversations, there's the idea of the UPG, the unverified personal gnosis, and how that fits into our idea of truth and effectiveness and things of that nature. Uh, Isaac, you were in the heathen community. I talked to some of my heathen friends about this, and their opinions about what is from the sagas versus what can be changed. And I'm sure, AC, with herbalism, you're talking about the individual plants and your experience of those individual plants. Are there ways that either of you would want to talk about that balance of your experience with an individual plant, or land or something of that nature versus the larger experience or the mythos, the lore surrounding something?
well, I think it's really important to be grounded in a tradition before you go off into UPG. I think that's the main thing. Because like in the way Freedom, my astrology teacher, talks about it, when you're learning something, there's like three parts. One is the tradition and the like traditional sources, the texts and so on, the Shastra. The second is the teachings of your teacher, of what your teacher says. And then the third is your personal experience. So they're all valid and they're all important, but not privileging one over the other is also important. And if you have a personal experience that directly goes against your teacher's teachings and the Shastras, then that there's probably something that needs to be looked at more in depth. Another thing that John Michael Greer has taught me, for instance, is that like when you are doing a scrying session, for one scrying session, you should do 3 meditation sessions on that scrying session. So it's like really looking at at the UPG and looking at it from a lot of different angles and using your left brain to check your right brain, I guess. And that's another thing, like in my spiritual tradition too, Richard Rose talks about intuition and reason and balancing and checking each with the other, because if one of them goes off into a direction, then without balancing, then that's where you get into problems.
I guess when you asked that question, the yarrow plant was just like coming into my mind. And I learned from the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine with Seven Song, who is one of my main herb teachers, some of the properties of yarrow as an anti-inflammatory and as an antiseptic, and good for reducing a fever. And, it has quite a wide range of properties. But I also, when I first started working with it, would just go into the yarrow patch to cry and sometimes I was bleeding. And so I knew that yarrow would help with stopping bleeding if you chewed some up and put it on. So sometimes, like one time there was like a dog fight and I was like wounded and like go to the yarrow patch to cry, and it gave such comfort and courage. It was just like, so there for me. And then I also made infused oil with yarrow and juniper, and I used that daily when I was in Thailand for a brief trip. Every day I would put it on my body, and I felt like the energy of that plant, of the yarrow specifically, was like a protective energy of my whole aura, of my whole system, being in a foreign place and around a lot of people I didn't know, and potentially around a lot of germs and things that I wasn't used to in my system. Like I felt like that yarrow juniper oil was like very protective. And that's definitely not something that we learned in herb school, about how yarrow might like protect your aura, but that's something that I learned through personal experience.
And it also goes with what yarrow has been used for historically, too. So it's like, it jives. Just like, before you start talking with Odin and like saying, oh, who actually was this kind of way, read and internalize all of the Eddas and all of the myths, meditate on them, then you can talk about what, then you have a frame of reference for who Odin might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have the technique, you have the framework that then allows for that communication to come through in a way that is clear, or clearer, at least.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to say, yarrow is one of the most important plants in my. I'm not an herbalist, but it's one of my plants that is in my heart a lot often.
Aww.
So I'm so glad you brought yarrow up, and I completely agree about it being very protective and very yes, just a really lovely plant.
I saw your whole face light up when I mentioned.
Yes. Was
Yeah.
not hidden, that is for sure.
Yes.
I think that is a very important point for all forms of magic, herbalism, and also the magic that we do just in the ways that we connect to the places we live. We are all three of us talking today happen to live in spaces where we have land and we have connections to plants and plant spirits that we can connect with in a different way when you really live there, even if you, like me, have to travel maybe a little bit more than you. For people who do not live in a wilder location, are there ways, you've already mentioned, AC, a connection that you had to how plants have helped you when you were traveling and you were in a place where you needed that protection? are there ways that you have done this kind of working or connected with these spirits when you were in more non-rural areas?
There's plants everywhere. I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like cities are wild. I mean, you can walk down a New York City and find espezote. What is that little chenopodium? That's in the cracks of the sidewalk. There's dandelions in the cracks of the sidewalk.
Mugwort.
There's
Planting.
yeah,
Mm.
and there's also giant ginkgo trees as a street tree, and you can connect. There's parks. Nature is everywhere. I mean, nature's inside you too.
One thing that I think is a starting place for connecting with nature is connecting with yourself. And so when I was traveling full time on my mini school bus around the country and like going to a different place every day, having that. So I had like a little altar in a silk, right? So I had like my journal and cards and a couple of stones and a candle wrapped up in like my grandmother's silk scarf. And anywhere I went and I'm laying myself down to sleep in a new place, I would put out that altar where I'm sleeping and then wake up and have my daily practice. And then I was feeling more connected to myself before I even stepped out into the world. And so that's one thing, like a tip for travelers, is to have like a pocket altar, a portable altar to take with you. But specifically in urban environments, like Isaac was saying, there are plants and animals to be found. And there are actually some really amazing trees that have been preserved in most of the cities that I've been to. And when I get to a new city, I just look on the map and I find the biggest chunk of green, and I go there. And so there's that. But even walking through neighborhoods, I've gone with my friend Jason, who's like a tree guy naturalist, through New York City on like an edible tree tour, just the two of us, and we were eating June berries and mulberries and yew berries, but not the seed. I did actually accidentally eat a couple of the seeds and I survived, but yeah. So there's, humans have planted a lot of plants in the cities. And so I think, starting with yourself and then going outward, finding the green. And even if you do find just like one little plant growing up from the cracks, like sitting down and spending some time with that plant you can have some cool conversations with just the baby mugwort popping up.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, in kind of heading back towards talking about the conference, I was curious. We've talked about kind of how it came about and your connections to obviously to Matthew Wood, having him as a keynote speaker. Was there any magic or divination or other practices that you did in prepping for it? Anything that you can tell us about. I'm sure maybe there are things you cannot share on the show, but if there is anything that you feel like, well, we did this and it felt like it really helped, or it was how we were thinking with it.
Well, I mean, I was just making sure to do my daily stuff every day,
Mhm.
during, I mean, every day anyway, but
Hmm.
especially and maybe even more, uh, just because there was a lot of stress for me in preparing for it. It was kind of a lot. So just making sure that my daily hygiene was taken care of was very important.
Yeah.
That's yeah, and I think that's in general a good idea. But I mean,
I'm trying to think if there was like a specific thing that we did in preparation. I don't think so, but there was yeah, just like the daily hygiene. And um for me, right before the conference, I grounded down by going into the woods of New Hampshire for 2 weeks for a rainbow gathering, which is something that I've done for years. And I think just being outside of the city grid and the cell phones and the away from all the technology, because obviously planning a conference requires a lot of work on the computer screen to make everything happen. So unplugging a few weeks before the conference was helpful for my spirit, and I feel like allowed me to be a little bit more present. it was hard for my physical body because I did end up getting like a really bad burn on my leg and a staph infection. So I went into the conference like for a month and a half trying herbally to fight a staph infection, and then finally took the antibiotics. So we were like hurting, like, to be honest with you, Joanna, like we were stress balls and, just like physically and emotionally, just like kind of stressed. So maybe we should have done more magic before the conference to chill the F
Well, you
out.
hit it really well. As someone who was there, you hit it really, really well because you made it look like it was easy. I know it's not, but
Yeah.
at the same time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was
Well, that's
definitely, yeah.
Mhm.
you there. So we had there were so many good panels that happened. I didn't get to see all of them. Obviously, no one could because they were happening, as is the case with all those conferences at
I
the same
know.
time. But when we had that discussion on stage, there was a question about how this is about the whole conference was about creating community, and as we have already spoken about, what the impetus and the inspiration for it was. How do you feel? Is there any lesson that you feel you've taken from it? Is there some way that you feel um, that's unfolding in the world, or things that you hope will create that healing network of community in the world that you want to share with people? Because I liked that description of it as a healing network.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even this conversation is part of that, I think.
Mhm.
And just like continuing on with the work, right? It's like the networks it's about developing long-term relationships too. And and not just like, and I'm seeing it in so like local community, regional community, uh regional, like extra regional community, like bigger regional community,
Mhm.
world community. It's like we're nested communities.
Yeah.
And they're all important. And they were all, like Gordon White put out a call, saying that this was going to be happening. Like we had people in other parts of the world, that were helping make the conference happen. And we had people from, like, you were from Vermont. We had people from that were born, right down the road. So it's like kind of like that nested. And I think that's the way of the at least near term future. And what's important for the near term future is being connected on all those levels. So yeah, so we have some ideas for things we want to do in the future. Maybe we're not ready to talk about them quite yet, but it was also really for us, our closest community, like our good friends who helped make it happen. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. Like I feel like we've tightened with all of them too, and like we help them with things, they help us, and like that's really at the base level. That's the most important is the core community that you're in a physical place. So strengthening that, and that we've seen that happening too, even in the last few months. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what types of connections and relationships really do flourish and unfurl from the connections that were made at the conference. But um yeah, so there's a few things that happened that made me excited. So the one thing was feeling like I was being passed the torch. So for me personally, it felt like a little bit of an initiation. The conference, I had 3 powerful mentor women in my life bless me with like a necklace. They like put this like power piece necklace, 3 different necklaces over my head in this initiatory way, saying, I'm proud of you. Like you're stepping into your role as like a community connector leader type of thing, and you're doing it. And there was one of the first people that came to the conference used to run herb conferences in the South. I think it was like West Virginia or something. So she was coming up and she was like, I used to do this for many years and I'm just so thrilled to be coming here and you're doing it. Like you're taking over and I'm, able to just enjoy. And I'm like, yeah, welcome here. You're held. I got you. Like I did all the work. You can just like enjoy the workshops and the food and not have to to worry about any of the organizing things. Like that's what we're doing. Yeah. And Kate Gilday and Lisa, who used to run conferences around here, they were just so grateful and thrilled that we were like picking up the baton basically. And I think it is really important to have like the younger generations stepping into those leadership positions like we're doing.
I mean, we're middle-aged now, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But it took me 10 years to really feel like I could offer anything to the herbal community or to be able to teach. After like 10 years of study, I'm finally like, okay, maybe I can lead a workshop and maybe I can organize this conference, so we're still a baby. I'm still a baby herbalist, in my mind.
Well,
But
I don't know if you're a baby herbalist, but I think that all of us, yes, we always have to acknowledge there's so much more to learn. But no, I wouldn't call you a baby herbalist. I'm sorry.
okay. Well, some of the other connections too, I'm thinking about like the friend group that really helped us to organize it, and then some of my like the volunteers that came from my like wider friend group who really know how to feed a bunch of people and make a batch of chai tea that's delicious for 125. Thank you, Sarah, from the People's Cauldron. She was our tea and coffee master. Just like seeing that group, like after everybody left for the conference, we had a little volunteer party. The following day, like a few people ended up staying and slept over, and we just like put up our sleeping bags on the floor of the barn on the rugs and watched Fern Gully together, eating popcorn.
Yep.
And like now we're all friends, like we're tight,
Yeah. I think that that's an incredibly important thing because, again, I think that there was there's been damage done by our entire culture for a long time to our sense of community and what that can be in a healthy way. That showing people and sharing that this can happen in a good way, and it can, people will come together and help one another. I was just, it was really beautiful to watch the amount of help, mutual help that you had garnered around you, and what that is, possible, to what you can create with that. And I think that that is something to hopefully inspire people who are listening to know, yes, this happened. This can happen in other places, in other ways too. You two are both incredibly special, so I'm not saying anyone can do it, but you know what I mean, that it is possible, and therefore that is a beautiful thing to share with the world in and of itself.
Yeah, totally.
You've already mentioned, you teased a little bit that there are things that you are thinking about for the future that you are not ready to share yet. That is totally fine. I will accept that. Is there anything, any other message that you'd want to share with people about the conference, or about something that you think people should think with, if they're inspired by the kind of thing that you did?
Well, I think it's just important to get connected, and in the physical plane, in the physical plane, at that area. I mean, this is also physical. Podcasts are also physical,
Yeah.
but that's important. But getting connected in all these levels of community, because sometimes it can be hard to find people who are like-minded in your group, in your like local area. But it's also important to connect with people who you don't agree with necessarily in that local area, and find and find people who are interested in something in common. Go to the mushroom walk, the plant walk. If there's not one in your area, start doing a plant walk or a mushroom walk, or a study group. I think
Book club.
book club,
Dinners.
potlucks. Yeah. I think that's really important at this time, especially, is connecting with the internet, and with podcasts, and with courses online, but also connecting with your local in-person community. Yeah.
Yeah.
And however that manifests. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that is really beautiful. As we come to a close, are there things that you want to share with us, Isaac? I know you have a book coming out that I'm excited to hear about. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I'm putting out the Heathen Golden Dawn with Aeon Books. That's coming out in April, and like, it's not something that it wasn't just me. John Michael Greer and Sven Eriksson started the rituals. It's modeled after the Celtic Golden Dawn, and a lot of the material is from the ancient sources. All the 9 herbs charm, the Eddas, it's bringing in all of that, and with the Golden Dawn framework. So it's making ceremonial magic, a Western ceremony. It's merging Western ceremonial magic with Germanic mythos and lore, and that kind of mythological framework, working with those archetypes, those deities, those god forms, the runes. And so it's kind of just something that needed to be done. And so I did it because I was the person to do it at this time. And it was also kind of like, it felt like my MA in occultism. You know, it's like so in a way I see it more of as like something, making this available for people who are interested in it. I've done the rituals, I put it together, but it wasn't something that I came up with out of thin air or anything. It's sort of like something that was needed to be done. So yeah.
I'm just going to say that as also as a violinist, there's nothing that's created out of thin air anyway. So yeah, that's
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, and
we're all repurposing on some level. So yes.
Exactly. And I think and there's some, well, yeah, so it's building on that large tradition. And I think some people get very purist about like heathenry, for instance, or ceremonial magic, for instance. I think it's very important to recognize that all these traditions are hybrids to a certain degree. There's always change and influx, and what's useful and helpful for somebody living in the 21st century and versus somebody living in a tribe in Northern Europe in 700, 800 AD is totally different. We can't even understand that framework of mind. So it's not necessarily appropriate to be trying to do things the way that they were done in 900 AD. Also, I mean, looking at ceremonial magic, looking at the Golden Dawn, it itself is a massive hybrid system of bringing together lots of disparate traditions of Europe, and you going back even further, through Egypt and Greece and so, and well, even like astrological. The astrology system really came from Babylon, like many. So it's like, it's already a syncretic system. So I'm just building on that tradition of syncretism.
Which also doesn't mean that we discount the importance, as you were saying, the 3 things,
Right.
the tradition, the teachers, and then of course experience. So it's part of a package still always. So
Right. And that's
hopefully
so
if it's
like,
done well, which I know yours will be. So I
well, it's
completely
also
agree.
in the same way that like a permaculture farm, there's going to be things that you're going to be doing this. You're going to be putting the swale, like there's the contour is one way, like you're going to be doing things, even if there's a lot of differences, the kind of plantings you're going to do, there's sort of like these larger things that have to be done this way for it to be right. And I feel like there could have been a lot of different ways that a Heathen Golden Dawn could have been made. It also, like, this is the only way it really could have been made for me, and I'm working with the traditions that are already there.
Yep, absolutely. And AC, what would you like to tell us about?
One thing that's steeping for me that I am considering putting some significant energy into this summer is an apprenticeship program here at the farm, because I've had some people who have come and apprenticed with me in the past, or like interned with me. And I think that there's actually like a huge desire for people who graduate from herb school and want more hands-on experience. They're like, okay, well, now what? I'm kind of a generalist herbalist, like community herbalist. And so I grow the herbs from seed, I make medicine, I do some community like consultations and make formulas specific for people. And then I do the markets and I do the educational events and the conference. So if people are like, I'm not sure which direction I want to go into, maybe I can dabble with AC for a few months in the summer and then like hone in on what path I want to follow.
Yeah.
I think I can help to guide people. And so that's something that I'm kind of going to bring into the world in a more formal way this summer.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's an incredibly valuable gift then, to be able to share with people, and very, very much needed, that is for sure. So
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest in it. So I'm like, all
yeah,
right,
I'm
just
not at
go
all
with that.
surprised.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I will thank you guys for your time. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any thought? I sometimes just leave it open to, if there's something that you think people in this particular time, well, they're always challenging. I feel like I never want to say in these particularly challenging times, because it's like things are always interesting, things are always happening in the world, even though the cycles can be at different points. But is there
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to leave people with?
I don't know. I think kind of already said it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I liked what Isaac was talking about when he was discussing like the building local community and the things that you can
Yep.
do. So I would
Mhm.
love to stress that again, is like
Yeah.
really getting to know your neighbors and your local community and building trust and a network to sustain us through these wild times that we're in, because change brings uncertainty, and it can bring fear. But if you have a support system and local friends and chosen family who can help to navigate some of those changes and to support each other, and everyone's bringing different skills to the community. So I want to just encourage that thought of how you individually can build your networks and build resiliency at a local and regional level.
I could not agree more. So thank you guys so much, and I can't wait to talk to you another time. I'm sure we'll come up with reasons. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so
thank
much
you.
for having us, Joanna.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare guide me back to my bed. The river is frozen, the pollen path's bare. Don't wait for me, darling, there's thorns in my